Hello and welcome to BBC News. On the morning that King Charles III has been formally proclaimed the new monarch in a ceremony at St James's Palace in central London. It's a ceremony that was traditional, performed in front of about 200 members of the Privy Council. But there was one new element to it today, the fact that it was all televised. The Privy Council includes, for example, the Prime Minister, a new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and all surviving former Prime Ministers.
The business for part one of the Council. My Lords, it is my sad duty to inform you that Her Most Gracious Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, has passed away on Thursday, the 8th of September, 2022, at Balmoral Castle. I propose that, when certain necessary business has been transacted, a deputation consisting of Her Majesty, His Royal Highness, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor, the Archbishop of York, the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Council, and myself shall wait on the King and inform him the Council is assembled. I now call on the Clerk of the Council to read aloud the text of the proclamation.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords spiritual and temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless His Majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. God save the King!
God save the King!
So, part of that ceremony. Earlier today, Privy Councillors then gathered in the throne room of St James's Palace to hear the King's address.
Business for Part 2 of the Council. Your Majesty, to make your declaration.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathize with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. It is the greatest consolation to me to know of the sympathy expressed by so many to my sister and brothers, and that such overwhelming affection and support should be extended to our whole family in our loss. To all of us as a family, as to this kingdom and the wider family of nations of which it is a part, my mother gave an example of lifelong love and of selfless service. My mother's reign was unequaled in its duration, its dedication, and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony, and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. In this purpose, I know that I shall be upheld by the affection and loyalty of the peoples whose sovereign I have been called upon to be, and that in the discharge of these duties, I will be guided by the counsel of their elected parliaments. In all this, I am profoundly encouraged by the constant support of my beloved wife. I take this opportunity to confirm my willingness and intention to continue the tradition of surrendering the hereditary revenues, including the Crown Estate, to my government for the benefit of all, in return for the sovereign grant, which supports my official duties as head of state and head of nation. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
I have with humble duty to crave your Majesty's permission for the publication of your gracious speech.
Approved.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
I understand that the law requires that I should, at my accession to the Crown, take and subscribe the oath relating to the security of the Church of Scotland. I am ready to do so at this first opportunity. I, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland in prosecution of the claim of right, and particularly by an act intituled An Act for Securing the Protestant Religion and Presbyterian Church Government, and by the acts passed in the Parliament of both kingdoms for union of the two kingdoms, together with the government, worship, discipline, rights and privileges of the Church of Scotland. So help me God.
I now invite Your Majesty to subscribe both copies of the instrument, confirming the oath has been taken. I now invite the witnesses to His Majesty's oath to sign both copies of the instrument.
Well, after that signing, the Garter King of Arms then stood on the balcony of St James's Palace and proclaimed Charles III the new king.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords Spiritual and Temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III. By the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless His Majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. Given at St James's Palace this 10th day of September in the year of our Lord 2022. God save the King! Three cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip, hip. Hooray! Hip, hip. Hooray! Hip, hip. Hooray!
And three cheers for the new King. And as we hear the national anthem, perhaps still all of us getting used to hearing, to singing, God Save the King. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale was at that ceremony at St James's Palace. He joins me from there. A ceremony steeped in tradition, in etiquette, James, but of course televised for the first time.
Yeah, and that had a really interesting impact, actually. I was talking to some of the members of the Privy Council after that, and they said it was almost like the liturgy of a church, actually. A lot of it very formal, a lot of it very, procedural and, orders and council and this and oaths of that. But they said that actually just by the recitation of that liturgy of the Constitution, if you like, many of them found it incredibly emotional. I mean, when they came out of that meeting, waiting for the proclamation formally to be made, they came just here and they milled around, and quite a few, I have to say, were blinking their eyes. It was almost as if this was the moment, at least for them, that the penny had dropped of the extraordinary change that has taken place to this country. And as I said, so we had ministers past and present, prime ministers past and present, all sitting here after the formal meeting was over, waiting for that proclamation, and then just like everybody else around us in the crowds, getting their cameras out, taking photographs, capturing that moment with a little bit of modernity after the ancient ceremony inside.
And that picture you paint is so striking in itself, isn't it? This is a tradition that dates back to the days where you had to proclaim to the various nations, the various parts of the UK that you had a new monarch. You had to tell the people that way. And we're looking at all the images now. Archbishop of Canterbury, former Archbishop of Canterbury, former Prime Ministers. Look at the roll call. These are people, by definition, used to a degree of formality, rules, procedures, and yet you describe them using their phones to take photos in the way that any of us would.
Yeah, I think we're witnessing here is that mixture of the ancient and the modern, the continuity of the constitutional procedure, one that none of us frankly know about. I mean, we all had to look up what happens at an Accession Council because it hasn't happened for so long. But actually realising that that's the significance of it, and the fact that it's more significant now that we have the technology to broadcast these things to the world so that everybody else can share in them. at the same time as being able to look at the new king and to hear what he says and to learn from his words about how he's going to rule. I think that's the really interesting thing that we're seeing here, is that mix between, on the one hand, paying tribute to the Queen, marking her passing, assessing her reign, but at the same time learning from the king, from his own words himself, how he is going to do it, how he is going to do things the same as he made clear this morning. He's renew his pledge to live up to his constitutional duties as much as his mother, but also just to find out a little bit more about how he's going to do things perhaps differently in the future.
Yes, and we are going to talk about exactly that in the next few minutes. Thank you for painting that picture for us. Thank you. That's our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale, who was at that ceremony. And in the last few minutes, the new king has returned to Buckingham Palace following that ceremony. He'd driven through the gates just in the last few moments. Again, you see those images, you just get that sense instantly of the huge numbers of people that are there at Buckingham Palace this Saturday lunchtime. And our correspondent Rebecca Jones is there as well. You've been watching the day's events and you doubtless will have seen, Rebecca, the new king being driven back to the palace in the last few minutes.
Yes, Jane, we saw King Charles III arrive here at Buckingham Palace within the last 20 minutes or so, and so warmly greeted by the huge crowds that have gathered here. And there's no doubt that there are more people here at Buckingham Palace today than there have been over the last couple of days, all different ages, from all different sorts of backgrounds, both from London, but I've also met people from further afield who've travelled from across the country and of course from abroad. Many people clutching bouquets of flowers with messages attached and drawings as well. I was particularly struck by one message from Poppy, who's age 7, and she'd written, "Sorry that the Queen has died and gone to heaven. I liked her corgis." And people are being encouraged now not to bring their flowers here to the palace and lay them at the palace gates, but instead take them to Green Park nearby, which is fast becoming a carpet of flowers, a garden of flowers. And of course, yesterday we saw the new king take his time to meet some of the crowds that had gathered here to hear some reflections on his mother and her long reign, and of course condolences. But he was also very warmly greeted. We saw that kiss, didn't we? And we also heard those shouts of "God save the King," and no doubt the many people who are still here at Buckingham Palace will be hoping that he might repeat that and come out and meet the crowds a little later. But he does have a very, very busy afternoon of meetings ahead of him. He'll be meeting religious leaders, including the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Dean of Westminster, political leaders, Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, who of course he met yesterday, and she offered her condolences, and we know that he said to her that when his mother died, that was the moment that he had been dreading. Well, she will be here with members of her cabinet and also opposition leaders as well. So a very busy day ahead for the new king. For his reflections, I'm joined here at Buckingham Palace by our home editor, Mark Easton. And I am curious to know what you've made of the day, because in some ways it's so informal, people just milling around here, aren't they? But yet we've also seen the height of tradition today, haven't we, at St James's Palace?
Such a contrast, isn't there, between the informality of that walkabout yesterday when, you know, the crowd were embracing the new king physically, and then we see this. I mean, to outsiders, perhaps even to us, it is extraordinary. It is quite odd. The language, the strange hats that people wear, the walking about, the nodding, and yet there is something incredibly important about that, and it's important right now. It was interesting, I thought, what the King said in his address to the country last night. If I can remind you, he talked of the late Queen's abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress. And I think for Charles, it will be about trying to find the right balance between the ancient and the modern. But the ancient is not just ancient. The ancient is current, and that matters because at a time of uncertainty, and goodness, we've got a new Prime Minister and a new King within days of each other. Both of them are obviously novices at the job. One hopes they're getting good advice. So it is a moment when we need perhaps to have some sense of stability. And I do think that when we see these ancient ceremonies with their archaic language, it allows people to connect with the backstory, with the history, and that can feel solid. It can feel reassuring, I think.
Yes, and it's interesting you mentioned that address last night, but I also feel the tone has been repeated today. There's a mixture as well, isn't there, of the formal but also the very personal.
Yes, the address last night was not the kind of sort of super formal address that we had as part of the proclamation ceremonies today. Yeah. It was personal. He talked about his mama. Yeah. You know, he talked about
his darling mama.
Darling mama, yes. And there was emotion there. And I think in a way it's interesting how he behaved at the walkabout yesterday. It was a very touchy-feely king, in contrast to his mother, actually, who always kept her sort of private feelings very separate from her public duties. Charles, it would appear, maybe slightly more comfortable in showing his own personal feelings about things. And I think that was, in the way that he delivered that address last night, there was something sort of deeply personal about it. And I think actually in this day and age, and maybe this is partly why he does feel confident, people like that. Yeah. They like to see that. Yes, they want all the solemnity. They want to see, you know, the ceremony, the tradition, the custom and the convention. They need that. But also a little twinkle in the eye. Yeah, we like that too. That's really important.
Yeah, and in some ways it's down to work today, isn't it? He's got these meetings with political leaders and religious leaders. Do you have any sense of what they might involve?
These are the initial meetings of the king with these key figures in the establishment. Yeah. And yes, he's now having to get on and be a king, do the job. And you know, obviously we've had the ceremonial this morning. These will be quite formal meetings. You know, there will be a process to be gone through, but it's also, I think, about relationships. I mean, Charles will know all these people because he's been Prince of Wales for so long. Today, though, he greets them as king, and that's different. And that's why today really matters.
Mark, for now, thanks for that. Mark Easton, our home editor. And with that, from Buckingham Palace, I'll hand you back to the studio.
Rebecca, many thanks. Rebecca Jones there outside Buckingham Palace. A few umbrellas just starting to go up there, I could see in the background. But my goodness, every time the camera moves across, you get a sense of the sheer number of people who are gathered there, don't you? Perhaps to be expected over the course of a weekend when people perhaps have a little more time off. But it is fair to assume that those numbers will continue to grow. Let's discuss what we've seen so far today with the royal historian. First of all, Dr. Jonathan Spangler. Very good afternoon to you. A very traditional ceremony that we've been witnessing at St James's Palace, but televised, an appropriate nod, I think, to modernity. What did you think of what you were witnessing?
Well, I have to say it was quite extraordinary. As someone who has been studying monarchy, ceremony, ritual, my professional career, to suddenly see it unfolding in front of my eyes was quite extraordinary. I have to say, and as someone who's just been interested in the British royal family since I was very small, and even fortunate enough to meet the Queen when I was at university. It really means something quite a lot, and I think it means something to quite a lot of people in this country.
And we again get the sense of the sheer enormity that everything that the nation is going through. We are reminded endlessly of the longevity of Her Majesty's reign, because our correspondent was explaining to us that You look at the people in the room, prime ministers, former prime ministers, Archbishop of Canterbury and their predecessors. These are experienced people used to these formal set-piece events. And yet, he said, as you watch them all emerge afterwards from that ceremony, there was a tear in the eye of many of them. And that is really striking, isn't it?
It really is. And I was struck as well by watching these things. And a friend of mine actually sent me a message saying, is it interesting that in this one moment we can see all of the figures of the political spectrum and religious and secular life mingling together in finally sort of one united moment. And to me, that's really one of the central things about the institution of monarchy, whether you're a supporter or not, is that because it floats above politics, it's one of the few elements of British society that really can unify such a large and diverse group of people.
And I'm interested in your take on what we have heard thus far from the still very new king in terms of looking forward, giving us some hints as to what his reign will look like, as to what he will strive to do. And he's talked about following his late mother's example. What are your thoughts about, as someone who's clearly deeply studied the monarchy, as to the tone that he is adopting thus far?
Well, I think that it was immediately evident that the tone, as he sort of indicated that it would, really shifted dramatically from heir to the throne to actually being on the throne. And that any whispers and talk over the last 2 or 3 or 4 decades of him suddenly changing elements of the proclamation or changing elements of the ceremony really didn't happen. And so while I'm sure there will be changes to the monarchy along the lines of what's already happened, the slimming down, the more modern approach, the more social friendly. At the same time, it's a very traditional organization, and it will continue to be so. I really would like to say, certainly see more in the coming days, even more of a reaching out to the other nations of the Commonwealth all around the globe.
Oh, that's interesting, because the Commonwealth very dear to the late Queen's heart, as we know. Are you suggesting that there is always more that can be done, more inclusiveness? What's your point there?
Well, I'm not sure I was suggesting something, and then they certainly mentioned the other realms and territories. And they made a big deal, I think, this morning in the ceremony to be inclusive, certainly from a legalistic point of view, of Scotland and the Church of Scotland. But I think that it would be really, really quite interesting, and I'm sure something will be happening in the coming days, to reassert links of the monarch as the King of Canada, as the King of Australia, etc.
Very interesting to hear your perspective. Thank you so much for now. I imagine we will talk again. Thank you for now. Dr. Jonathan Spangler there, joining us from Manchester. And in a few moments, we will discuss everything we've seen and indeed the coming days and weeks with Sir Anthony Selden, the royal historian as well. But before we join him, let's talk to Atifa Shah, who has met now King Charles III many times in her role as a founder member of Her Majesty's British Asian Trust. Atifa Shah, welcome to our coverage. You have met, well, then Prince Charles very many times indeed. So first of all, we're all so interested to know your thoughts on him, what you've learnt from him, the conversations you've had with him over the years, and what you think of him.
Yes, of course. I actually met His Majesty now in 2007. I was very young at the time, and it was at an awards dinner. Actually, no, it wasn't at the awards dinner. It was actually at Clarence House. That was the first time I met His Majesty. And a lot of the conversation that we had was very interesting. His Majesty took a very keen interest in understanding how what are the issues and the challenges that were being faced by minorities in England. And it was beyond than just an interest, because what His Majesty at the time wanted to do was really play an active role in addressing some of those challenges. And in 2007, in 2006, actually, the Young Muslim Leadership Programme in Oxford was initiated by, at the time, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, and now His Majesty. And that has continued on and still continues today, and has impacted a number of young people from across the country who then go back into their communities and help to mentor and help to guide a lot of young people that perhaps do come from those marginalised communities. And beyond that, when we visited Clarence House in 2007, His Majesty actually asked us, he said, what can I do more? Because through this Young Muslim Leadership Programme, I will have 20, 30 people that will come each summer and they will study this programme and then go back into the communities. But for me, I want to have an even bigger impact. And through His Majesty's personal efforts and friends, in 2008, Mosaic was born, which became a mentoring initiative across the country that has helped thousands of young people from deprived communities to achieve things that they probably thought they never could.
That is so interesting, because I think you're suggesting that he was aware of the influence that he could have, that having his help behind something could drive the organisation forward. So was your sense that it was coming from a very genuine personal place? He wanted to do more. He knew that his influence could have an impact.
Absolutely. The invitation we received at Clarence House was a personal invitation from His Majesty to come and discuss what more could be done for the communities that we belong to. And I actually remember specifically His Majesty saying that, how can I help to enhance the good work that you are doing in society? And, and that has stayed with me many times. And, it's not common for particularly people like me from the north of England to be meeting at the time the Prince of Wales so many times. And when I talk to people about my experiences and my conversations with His Majesty, they very much, and I always talk about that one time, my first meeting with His Majesty, and I just knew at that time that this was somebody that genuinely, wholeheartedly wanted to help those that he felt were perhaps marginalized in some way, or sort of go beyond what charities, other charities that existed. But that's the UK. Actually, I have seen and have witnessed the work and the impact His Majesty has had beyond the UK and into the Commonwealth, and through the British Asian Trust, for example, has has curated campaigns, I would say, that have dealt with issues such as mental health, which is something which we have seen, sort of a pattern of throughout the royal family, is dealing with some of those core issues. And His Majesty has never shied away from the most difficult issues in our society. And I think that all comes from a place of genuine interest.
Atifa Shah, a real pleasure to talk to you. I hope we may speak again. Thank you very much for now. Thank you for your time. As promised, we are also going to talk this lunchtime to Sir Anthony Seldon, historian, author of many biographies, of course, and he joins me from outside. I think it looks as if you're in Windsor, Sir Anthony, so I hope you can hear me well, but it's good to talk to you again. But my goodness, we've been watching these images from St James's Palace, and what a week. A new monarch and a new Prime Minister.
Yes, isn't that fascinating? And this has not occurred before since the birth of the democratic age. And if anyone was watching this from Mars this week, they'd think, new Prime Minister, what a enormous big deal that is. And then they'd think, hold the horses, new monarch, death of a monarch, new monarch, totally and utterly eclipsing it, and everyone has all but forgotten that we have a new Prime Minister, and the new monarch is what everyone is talking about, not just in this country with King Charles III, but all around the world. No other country has had a leader as famous as Queen Elizabeth. No other country, in fact, has such a successful monarchy, which remains relevant. When the Queen became to the throne in 1952, there were 100 monarchies. Now outside the Commonwealth, there are mere 25. They're either irrelevant or they are despots, they're autocrats as kings. Britain and Japan are so unusual in having a monarchy that is actually relevant and so dominant and so important inside the country and Britain's place in the world. Remarkable.
Remarkable indeed. And to today's ceremony and everything we've seen in the last 24 hours, I am very interested, of course, in your take on what we have heard, the tone, the mood of what we have heard from the new king already. A lot of people very touched by his address yesterday. And what are we learning, what are you learning about what sort of king he is likely to be?
Well, it comes from the heart, doesn't it? He spoke from the heart about his mother. She was his mother as well as all our queen. About his darling wife, but also about his children, and including Harry and Meghan, and that desire to forgive and be inclusive. He was more attacked than many Prince of Wales have been in the past for his ideas, and yet what's fascinating is that his ideas have anticipated the 21st century. His emphasis on the green agenda, on the environment, on local communities, on arts and crafts, on mental health, on the importance of a holistic education, a rounded education, on volunteering, on the importance of faiths. I mean, these are the great issues of the 21st century. So I think he will continue the work of our great lost queen and take the monarchy forward, modernise it, keep it relevant, and ensure that it's handed over to his son, King William, as far away as possible, we hope in time, as something which is strong and as vital as it here is outside Windsor Castle here today on this sad day in 2022. And having had that magnificent historic cemetery this morning at St James's Palace, no country on earth does ceremony, history, tradition like Britain.
Sir Anthony Selden, very good to talk to you as ever. Many thanks for your time. Thank you so much. Sir Anthony Selden there, biographer, historian, speaking from Windsor, and all the while our cameras, of course, still trained on central London. Following this morning's formalities, done so well, as Sir Anthony Selden was just outlining for us there. We stay very much focused on the capital here today because we know that the new king has plenty more formalities to come over the course of the afternoon. He has religious leaders to meet later on this afternoon. He has political leaders. And Sir Anthony Selden again reflecting on what a remarkable week this has been, meeting a still very, very new Prime Minister. And all the while, crowds gathered around Buckingham Palace to pay their tributes to the late Queen. Charles III has been proclaimed king in a historic ceremony at St James's Palace in London. He's paid tribute to his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth. He was formally declared the new monarch by the Privy Council, which includes his son, the new Prince of Wales, and Prime Ministers past and present.
And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me, and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
Then the official proclamation of Charles as king was read from the balcony of St James's Palace.
Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III.
Following that proclamation, the flag at Windsor Castle, which has been at half-mast since the death of the Queen, was raised again. The King has approved an order that the day of the Queen's funeral will be a bank holiday across the country. And also around the nation, people are signing books of condolence in memory of the Queen, and the floral tributes continue to grow. A 1-minute silence is being observed at some sporting events which are going ahead today. Hello, a very good afternoon and welcome again to BBC News on the day that Charles III has been proclaimed King in a ceremony at St James's Palace in front of hundreds of members of the Privy Council. In a traditional ceremony, but one which was televised for the first time, the new Lord President, the Conservative MP Penny Mordaunt, confirmed the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II before the new monarch swore an oath. King Charles paid tribute to his late mother, saying her reign had been unequalled in dedication, duration and devotion, and he vowed to follow her example and seek peace, harmony and the prosperity of all the nations where he is now head of state. He also confirmed that the day of the Queen's funeral will be a bank holiday across the country. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell has been watching the day's events.
In the setting of London's original royal palace at St James's, the Accession Council, a meeting of 200 Privy Councillors, Britain's political leaders, past and present, with other notable figures, a meeting rooted in past centuries, essential to the transition to a new reign and seen for the first time through television. The King joined the Accession Council gathered in the palace's throne room to make his declaration.
It is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen. I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathise with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered. My mother's reign was unequalled in its duration, its dedication and its devotion. Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to me. In taking up these responsibilities, I shall strive to follow the inspiring example I have been set in upholding constitutional government and to seek the peace, harmony and prosperity of the peoples of these islands and of the Commonwealth realms and territories throughout the world. And in carrying out the heavy task that has been laid upon me and to which I now dedicate what remains to me of my life, I pray for the guidance and help of Almighty God.
Concerning the security of the Church of Scotland.
The King took a centuries-old oath to preserve the position of the Church of Scotland.
I, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of my other realms and territories, King, Defender of the Faith, do faithfully promise and swear that I shall inviolably maintain and preserve the settlement of the true Protestant religion as established by the laws made in Scotland.
Watched by the heir to the throne, Prince William, Prince of Wales, and Camilla the Queen Consort, he signed the oath Charles R. Charles Rex, King. And then a moment of pageantry. From a balcony, the proclamation of the new king's reign.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to his mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III.
The King's Guard gave 3 cheers.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray!
Following centuries-old tradition, the proclamation was also issued in the City of London. It will be repeated in Britain's other national capitals tomorrow.
Hooray! Hip, hip!
Affirming and proclaiming the reign of Charles III to all corners of his kingdom. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, here are some of the key events that we expect over the next 10 days. The Queen's coffin is expected to leave Balmoral tomorrow to be taken to the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. It will then be taken in a procession along the Royal Mile to St Giles Cathedral for a service attended by members of the royal family. The Queen's body will remain at St Giles for a period of lying at rest. The coffin will then be flown to London and taken to Buckingham Palace and then to the Palace of Westminster. And it is there, in the ancient space of Westminster Hall, that the Queen's body will lie in state. Members of the public will then have the opportunity to pay their respects. And the conclusion of those events will be the state funeral. That is expected in about 10 days' time at Westminster Abbey, after which the Queen will be laid to rest at St George's Chapel, Windsor. And let's go live now to St James's Palace and join our diplomatic correspondent, James Landale, who was watching this morning's ceremonies. James.
Jane, what struck me today was just how much it was a mix of ancient and modern. In times past, all the old literature, the language we saw, the old rituals, the phrases, dating back so many centuries. But at the same time, the sheer modernity of it, the fact that the cameras were allowed in to see the Crown engaging with its Privy Council, see the King talking to his parliamentarians as never seen before. At the same time, the Privy Council, many of them came out and mingled here, waiting for the proclamation. And I have to say, just like everybody else, they were getting their cameras out, even though some of them were wearing morning dress and top hats. And I have to say, when I spoke to them, quite a few of them were blinking pretty hard. There was a real sense this morning that for some of them, this was the moment when the penny dropped. And I think that's what we're going to see later on this week as the coffin travels, as the Queen lies in state. That sense of just people getting the chance to be exposed to what's happened, not just read about it and watch it on the news, but to actually engage with this extraordinary event that has taken place. With 2 things happening. People paying their respects to the Queen, paying their tributes, their memories, assessing this extraordinary life, but at the same time, learning a little bit more about their new king and how he wishes to reign. His address yesterday, his declaration today, clues and hints about how he is going to do things, not just to reinforce his mother's legacy, but also do things his own way in the future.
James Landale, thank you, at St James's Palace. Well, at Windsor Castle, where the Queen chose to spend much of her time in the last year, the flag, which had been at half-mast since her death, was raised in recognition of the King's proclamation. Crowds have continued to gather outside the late Queen's residences across the country, laying flowers and paying their respects to Her Majesty. Our correspondent Dan Johnson reports now from Windsor.
Terry Stelling served in Her Majesty's name, and this morning he came to Windsor to pay thanks for her service.
Ma'am, it was an honour to serve you and the country. God bless you, your servant. I swore an allegiance to the Queen when I first joined up. While she was there, everybody had so much confidence. But now that she's gone, we don't know what Charles the King's going to be. We've got a new Prime Minister. Everything's changing all at once.
And that shift was symbolised here as the new king was officially proclaimed. Modern methods are being used to keep up with the most ancient ceremonies. Tim was keeping an eye on the Accession Council meeting.
It's a sad day and a good day for the king, so mixed emotions.
What do you think of all the the ceremony? It's a big moment in the life of the nation, isn't it?
You know, we've never known anyone other than the Queen, and nor are most people in this country. So it's a momentous time, yeah.
All sorts of people have come for all kinds of reasons, from many different places, to leave their own tribute. But as ever, it is the Queen herself who's the consistent presence, the unifying force here.
The flowers are being moved each night into the castle itself, so what's here now is just what's built up this morning. And if we turn around to look down Windsor's long walk, you can see just how many people there are arriving.
The scene is similar at Buckingham Palace. So what does the Queen mean to Shirley?
Everything. I've known her all my life. And her father before. And it's a privilege to be here. To just be part of what everybody feels. We've lost someone very, very gracious.
Some are here in Windsor in sadness, others in gratitude. And there's a broader sense of what a big change this is in the life of the nation.
This is all just who we are as the British, isn't it? All coming together, and yeah, you just feel very united.
You feel that she's still here. That's all I can say.
This is about duty, respect, and giving thanks for the Queen we've lost and for the new King. Dan Johnson, BBC News, Windsor.
Well, as we said, the Queen's coffin is due to leave Balmoral tomorrow, travelling to the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. Our royal correspondent Sarah Campbell is at Balmoral. Sarah.
Yes, Jane, as you say there, it won't be long now until the Queen makes her final journey from here. It is a beautiful day, the sun is shining. It is not difficult to see why it is said that the Queen loved it here so much, and people have been arriving in their droves to say their final goodbyes, travelling from all over this area and from further afield, just feeling compelled to be here, to say that they were here, to tell their children that they were here, to bring their children with them, even if they're really too young to understand that they are participating in a moment in history. It really is quite emotional here today, and people that I've spoken to are saying that they are also thinking about the Queen's family. Her children travelled here on Thursday, Prince Andrew, Prince Edward and Princess Anne, and since then they have been joined by their partners and their children, and they are expected to leave here at some point today and make the short journey to the nearby church, Crathy Kirk, where they will take part in a private family service. Crathy Kirk was very important to the Queen. Of course, her faith was so important to the Queen, so it is a place that during her life she visited regularly along with her family. The Queen, the King, the new King, when he made his first statement as King, talked about the comfort that the family had received from knowing the affection with which the Queen was held. And when the family leave Crathy Kirk and they travel back here to the gates of Balmoral, they will be able to see and read some of those messages for themselves. That bank of flowers behind me continues to build up. Those messages continue to build up for the late Queen.
Sarah Campbell, thank you at Balmoral. Let's go to Wales as well, and our correspondent Hal Griffith, because Wales has a new Prince and Princess.
Yes, indeed, an announcement that I think surprised lots of people. It's not a title that's automatically conferred to the heir, and it is a title that, well, divides opinion here in Wales. Earlier this year, a poll by ITV Wales suggested that only 46% of people thought this should be passed on from Prince Charles, 31% of people against having a new Prince of Wales, and well over 20% of people not sure. So I think the opinions are mixed. Prince William and Catherine are, of course, familiar to people here in Wales. They both lived on Anglesey for over 3 years as he served as a search and rescue helicopter pilot. He is also the patron of the Welsh Rugby Union. So familiar figures, but will they want to have a home in Wales as Prince Charles has had? Will they deepen their ties with Wales? The First Minister, Mark Drakeford, he said he looks forward to that relationship deepening. But as I suggested, some people questioning why people who aren't born in Wales and don't have those strong links should have this title. And there may be, well, a dilemma for them ahead. Wales play England in the Football World Cup later this year. William is the president of the English FA. Where will his loyalties lie when that match kicks off?
Howard Griffith, thank you in Cardiff. Well, Plymouth is one of the places where a 21-gun salute took place this morning to mark the proclamation of King Charles III. And as people continue to pay tribute to the Queen, our South West England correspondent Jenny Kumar is in the city this lunchtime. Jenny.
I'm at the Civics Church here in Plymouth, and today lots of people coming to lay flowers and pay tribute to the Queen. This is a naval city. The Queen visited here and the wider region many times, and it was in the nearby town of Dartmouth where the then Princess Elizabeth met her future husband-to-be, Prince Philip. The Queen had a strong connection to this region, and many people here feel a deep connection to the Queen. Church bells ringing out at Plymouth Civic Church in tribute to Her Majesty the Queen. A book of condolences was set up yesterday here at St Andrew's Church, and already hundreds have left messages. Many are expressing their feelings with flowers, including Robert, who's also mourning the recent loss of his wife.
And we're all going to miss the Queen because she was an inspiration. When she's talking to someone, like I'm talking to you now, she was absolutely raptured with the person she was talking to. Not a case of, oh, I've heard this before. It was a case of listening and being really interested. And that is something she gave to every single person she met. A fantastic woman. To be missed.
We've all been waiting for this moment, knowing it's coming, but not fully prepared for it. I just was chatting to a family a moment ago, and a child said the mum said the child was crying all day at school yesterday. I spoke to somebody who was 94, and he was surprised by the fact he couldn't stop crying.
As the Royal Yacht Victoria and Albert glides into the mouth of the River Dart, memories must...
Plymouth and Devon have a proud Royal Naval heritage and strong connections with the Queen. As a 13-year-old, Her Majesty visited the Naval College in Dartmouth. It was the first time she remembered meeting a young cadet called Prince Philip. The rest, as they say, is history.
Throughout her life, Her Majesty the Queen, my beloved mother, was an inspiration.
And with the Queen's passing, we witness further historic moments. A new king. Here at this care home in Plymouth, there was much interest in His Majesty's first speech.
I thought it was very good indeed.
Good, yeah, convincing.
Pretty sad. Brings back a lot of memories.
I felt very involved with it, like if I was there with him. It was so sad I could listen to him talking for hours.
You think he did a good job?
I think so, yes. And his mum would be proud of him.
What kind of king do you think he'll make?
Well, we'll have to wait and see, won't we? I mean, from what he's saying now, he's going to make a good king, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Her dedication and devotion as sovereign never wavered.
While many here grieve for Her Majesty the Queen, they look forward to the new reign of King Charles III. Jenny Kumar, BBC News.
Well, the King will later today hold an audience with the Archbishop of Canterbury and is meeting members of the Cabinet and opposition parties, as we've been saying. And MPs and peers have resumed paying their tributes to Queen Elizabeth in special sittings of both Houses of Parliament. Let's cross there and join our political correspondent, Ione Wells. And relatively unusual for the building you're in to be full at a weekend, Ione.
That's right. In this rare sitting of the Houses of Parliament on a Saturday, MPs and peers are continuing to pay tributes to the late Queen today. Those tributes have just started to begin in the House of Commons, with the Deputy Prime Minister, Theresa Coffey, making some tributes just as we're speaking now. But before this all happened, we also saw quite an unusual ceremony, not something that we have seen since the last kind of new monarch, which is some senior politicians pledging a new oath of allegiance to King Charles III. This is not something that all MPs have to do, but certainly some senior politicians did today. We saw the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, leaders of the opposition parties as well, pledge that oath. It's something other MPs will have the opportunity to do at a later date should they wish to, and is still something that is obligatory in the House of Lords as well. But the tributes will now be taking place throughout the afternoon. They're expected to go on till about 10 p.m. this evening. I think we can expect more of the kind of heartfelt memories that we saw from politicians yesterday, with many sharing their own personal memories of meeting the Queen or when she visited their constituencies. Now, later today as well, there will be this audience between the King and the Prime Minister and her new cabinet as well. A symbolic moment, really, that will close a week that started with Boris Johnson presiding over Her Majesty's government and is closing with Liz Truss presiding over His Majesty's government.
Ione Wells, thank you. Football grounds and racecourses around the country will be empty this afternoon after those sports decided to postpone events to mark the death of Queen Elizabeth. But after the government signalled that individual governing bodies should make their own decisions, some sport is going ahead. Our sports correspondent Jo Wilson reports.
No one at the Oval needed to be told. As the cricketers of England and South Africa readied themselves, there was a hush in the grandstands long before the announcer officially declared a minute of silence would begin. And then came the reflection. And then came God Save the King. This was truly a unique sporting atmosphere, but England's captain was sure that playing on was the right thing to do.
Sad couple of days for not only us, but the whole nation and the world as well. So, I mean, it's great to be stood here knowing that we're going to be out and playing this game. You know, not just for us, but almost in memory of the Queen.
Within minutes, England were back in the routine. Early success for James Anderson, early problems for South Africa. The wickets fell and the crowd cheered. The rhythm of cricket, the entertainment of sport. Elsewhere, there was silence. Football authorities across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland decided that matches should not take place this weekend. Horse racing, Queen Elizabeth's great passion, will also pause today and resume with a sense of thanks tomorrow. One of the biggest mass sporting occasions of the year will take place as scheduled tomorrow in Newcastle. The Great North Run, with some 60,000 entrants, due to raise millions for charity, as planned.
Our mission is to organise the event in such a way that it pays true respect to the Queen's life, hopefully remembers the Queen's life as well as her death, and also allows people to express their own feelings and their own tribute to our great Queen.
Queen Elizabeth marked and elevated some of the proudest sporting moments. As the winners changed, she was a constant. And as her involvement in horse racing displayed, sport was her source of joy, as it is for so many. Jo Wilson, BBC News.
Now, we will just take a look briefly at a few other stories making the news this lunchtime. And in Ukraine, President Zelensky has said his forces have recaptured dozens of towns and villages from Russian units in the northeast of the country. A Russian-appointed official in occupied Ukraine admitted earlier that Ukrainian forces had achieved a significant victory this week. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has said that Pakistan needs massive financial support following the devastating floods that have marooned vast parts of the country. On the second day of his visit there, he described the situation as unimaginable. More than 1,400 people have died and millions of people have been forced to flee their homes. UK scientists have established how air pollution can lead to cancer, a discovery that they say will transform our understanding of how tumours arise. The findings, presented to the European Society for Medical Oncology, could lead to drugs that can block the disease. But now we will again talk about our main story here, of course, the accession. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell has been following all the day's events. A ceremony at St James's Palace, Nick, pomp, pageantry, a really remarkable morning.
Yes, and for the first time, of course, we've all been able to share in it and witness it on television. Now, it wasn't needed to create him as king in a legal or constitutional sense, but it was important, I think, in establishing him as king as part of that process. It's not the easiest of transitions. It wouldn't be for anybody after a monarch who was so revered around the country. We heard from Charles, the King, the moving, heartfelt speech last night, the King's address, much more businesslike, I think, this morning. And it was his decision, ultimately, that it could be televised. We heard him reiterate his pledge to act as a constitutional monarch, very important. I shall strive to follow the inspiring example set by my mother, he said. And all of this, of course, being watched closely by Prince William, the new Prince of Wales, and the Queen Consort. The next time we will see an Accession Council, we would expect it to be William's Accession Council. So I think all part of this process of establishing this reign and reassuring everybody that King Charles will reign according to the path set by his mother and following the example set by his mother.
Nicholas Witchell for now. Thank you. Now we will just pause and take a look at the day's weather prospects wherever you are in the country. Chris Fawkes has those. Chris.
Hi Jane, thank you. Well, we are seeing quite a change in our weather patterns at the moment. An area of low pressure that's been with us for much of the last week, bringing widespread showers and thunderstorms, is beginning to lose its influence with a ridge of high pressure building in to western areas. And that's why we have the best of the sunshine today across western and particularly northwestern areas. Still, though, rather a lot of cloud for eastern Wales, central and eastern areas of England. So glorious in the sunshine earlier today. Argyll and Bute, barely a cloud in the sky here, very still conditions. But across eastern areas of England, the cloud's still thick enough to bring a few isolated showers. They're not as heavy, not as widespread as we've seen over recent days, but still a chance of a shower from North Yorkshire down to around Kent. The best of the sunshine continues to be across Scotland and Northern Ireland. And in the sunshine with light winds, it's going to continue to feel pleasantly warm. Temperatures high teens to low 20s for most. Now, overnight tonight, the cloud will tend to thin and break and we'll have lengthy clear spells. For most, temperatures will be similar to recent nights, around 11 to 13 degrees Celsius, but it does turn colder than that in Scotland, down to about 6 in the coldest areas. There will be a few mist and fog patches around here as well. Now, tomorrow, the best of the sunshine is shifting a little bit further eastwards. So central and eastern Scotland, central and eastern England, eastern areas of Wales, a lot of dry weather and sunshine, but clouds will gather for Northern Ireland. Here we'll see some heavy outbreaks of rain developing through the afternoon, and eventually some of that rain will spread to western areas of Scotland as well. Temperatures, no great changes, high teens to low 20s, but then Sunday night we see this area of heavy rain spreading from Northern Ireland across Scotland, northern England, northern parts of Wales. The rain at its heaviest for Dumfries and Galloway and Cumbria, and that rain will linger across these central areas as we head into Monday. Sunshine and a few showers for northern Scotland where it's going to turn cooler, but to the south of our weather front across East Anglia and the southeast, with hazy sunshine, it actually gets a bit warmer with temperatures climbing to around 25 or 26 degrees Celsius, and there'll be a lot of dry weather to come into the week ahead as well. That's the latest.
You are watching BBC News, and King Charles III has been formally proclaimed the new monarch in a ceremony at St James's Palace. About 200 members of the Privy Council gathered, including the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, the Archbishop of Canterbury and all surviving former Prime Ministers. And it is the first time that the ceremony has been broadcast live on television. King Charles also confirmed that the day of Queen Elizabeth's state funeral will be a public holiday in Britain.
The business for part 1 of the Council. My Lords, it is my sad duty to inform you that Her Most Gracious Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, has passed away on Thursday, the 8th of September, 2022, at Balmoral Castle. I propose that, when certain necessary business has been transacted, a deputation consisting of Her Majesty, His Royal Highness, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the Lord Chancellor, the Archbishop of York, the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Council, and myself shall wait on the King and inform him the Council is assembled. I now call on the Clerk of the Council to read aloud the text of the proclamation.
Whereas it has pleased Almighty God to call to His mercy our late Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, of blessed and glorious memory, by whose decease the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is solely and rightfully come to the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George. We, therefore, the Lords spiritual and temporal of this realm, and members of the House of Commons, together with other members of Her late Majesty's Privy Council, and representatives of the realms and territories, aldermen and citizens of London and others, do now hereby, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that the Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III, by the grace of God of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith, to whom we do acknowledge all faith and obedience with humble affection, beseeching God, by whom kings and queens do reign, to bless His Majesty with long and happy years to reign over us. God save the King!
God save the King! Well, that was part of the formal proclamation ceremony that was held at St James's Palace this morning. Let's just look ahead to some of the key events expected over the next 10 days. The Queen's coffin is expected to leave Balmoral tomorrow to be taken to the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. It will be taken in a procession along the Royal Mile to St Giles Cathedral for a service attended by members of the royal family. The Queen's body will remain at St Giles for a period of lying at rest. Then the coffin will be flown to London and taken to Buckingham Palace, and then to the Palace of Westminster. It is there, in the ancient space of Westminster Hall, that the Queen's body will lie in state. Members of the public will then have the opportunity to pay their respects. The conclusion of these events will be the state funeral. That's expected in about 10 days' time. It'll be held at Westminster Abbey, after which the Queen will be laid to rest in St George's Chapel in Windsor. Well, let's return to Balmoral. My colleague Anita McVeigh is there. And just as we have seen, Anita, at other royal residences, people coming to gather there at Balmoral all the time.
Jane, very much so. Thousands of people filing over the Balmoral Bridge, just a short distance along the road from the gates of Balmoral Castle itself today, to pay their respects, to lay flowers, to take a quiet moment and to read the messages on the bouquets already left there. The Queen's body is at rest here at Balmoral Castle in the ballroom, where members of her family have been privately paying their last respects, as well as the staff who worked, many of them, with her for so many years, saying their goodbyes, taking a chance to do that privately. So many people filing through here today. Let me just bring you up to date with a few things. We are expecting that the members of the royal family still here at Balmoral will leave the castle at some point this afternoon to go to a church service at Crathy Kirk. That is the church very close to the castle, where members of the royal family worship when they are usually here during the summer holidays. Now, we know that the members of the family still here are the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, her husband, Vice Admiral Tim Lawrence, her children, Zara and Peter Phillips, also Prince Andrew, his daughters, the Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, and the Earl and Countess of Wessex, Edward and Sophie, and their daughter, Lady Louise. So they are all still here at the castle. Well, joining me now at Balmoral are just some of the people who've been queuing here to lay flowers, to pay their respects. I have with me brother and sister, Adam and Rachel, who are 13 and 15 respectively, and Maria, no relation to Adam and Rachel. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. I'll begin with you, Adam and Rachel. Adam, tell us why, and you're here today, I know, with your mum and dad. Tell us why, as a family, you decided to come here today.
Because the Queen was the greatest monarch ever who lived in Britain.
And Rachel, what has it been like to be here among the crowds on this occasion?
It's been incredible. It's been really historic, and it's been really nice just seeing everyone laying their flowers and, you know, giving respect to the Queen. It's been really nice.
Maria, you're originally from Poland, but you've lived in Aberdeen for 30 years, and I know your family's connection with Scotland goes back to World War II, when your father was stationed here. And what did he tell you about the Queen at that point? Because I know he talked about the royal family to you back home.
Especially, you know, this was the one lady, and, you know, everybody accept her, everybody loved her very much. And when she died, the heaven even opened and cried the heaven. Yes, I'm married Aberdonian, and now I'm, you know, on my own, but very, very happy and all the time. And every time when I have some friends from Poland, I took to the church, you know, and have the mass with the Queen, you know.
Yes, you've been at Crathy Kirk on a couple of occasions, yes, when the Queen was there as well.
Yes, of course the Queen was there, you know, and first I sit in the right side, and I cannot see the Queen, but next time, you know, when I took in the left side, and I saw the Queen, and when the mass finished, you know, I came the main door out, but the lady, you know, some crowd was outside, and they was asking me what the hymn was, how was the mass was, you know. They thought, you know, I was invited by the Queen, but no, I just was like a tourist, everything. And I was 3 times in Bremer game, and even I took photo of when she was departure, you know, from the game, and I was kneeling on the grass, and when she was passing with the nice car, you know, I took photo, and of course Queen was inside, but the car was like a mirror, and I was outside the car, you know, in a reflection, you know. A really, really good memory about,
very,
you know,
very
Queen.
Special moments for you. Adam, do you have any special memories of the Queen? Did you watch the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, for example?
Yeah, some of it.
And Rachel, did you watch those with your brother?
Yeah, they were really nice to watch, really good.
Do you have any moments that you think as a teenager that you will specially remember of the Queen?
I really liked all the Christmas, messages she always broadcasted. They were always really nice to watch, her just saying how much she loved the country, and yeah, it was really nice.
What do you think of the atmosphere here today, both of you?
It's really nice just seeing everyone pay their respects and kind of a unity in everyone, mourning her loss, because she really was here for at least all of my lifetime, if not many others.
And it's really, I guess, quite a thing to be part of this historic moment, isn't it, Adam?
Yes, it is. It's really nice.
Maria, you've told us some of your memories of the Queen. What's your favourite memory of her? Because I know your father spoke of her when he was stationed here. You told me before our conversation that you've always had a real interest in what she's been doing.
Yes, exactly, and I dress, all the time in a Scottish, to the church or to any occasion. I have my old outfit, and my grandson, he's 32, Joel, and I just bought him for measure the whole outfit of the Celt, and we all love her very much. And for the, Jubilee, was really nice when the Charles started talking, shout loudly, "Mum will be here us," and this was really, really nice. And when he just call her my mummy, and this was, and he will never, now he will be very happy, and I hope he will be very nice king too.
It's strange, isn't it, Rachel, to think now, to talk about a king, King Charles, rather than a queen?
Yeah, it's very strange having everything now switched, God save the king. But yeah, I don't know, it's going to be strange, whatever happens, because she was there for so long. Yeah.
She absolutely was. Thank you so much for talking to us, Adam, Rachel and Maria. Thank you. So Adam, Rachel and Maria, just 3 of the thousands of people who've been arriving here today. Many more will file through later in the day, no doubt, because coaches have been laid on to take people from local towns like Balmoral, for example, which is the nearest town to Balmoral, so they can come here and pay their respects. So just a reminder that at some point this afternoon we are expecting that the members of the royal family still here at Balmoral Castle will make their way to the local church for a service. And of course here we will keep a close watch on all the developments throughout the day. The Queen's body still at rest here at Balmoral Castle, a place where members of her family said she was absolutely happiest, where she could relax and feel free. But just as recently as Tuesday, of course, was still carrying out her duties and appointing a new Prime Minister. For the moment, from Balmoral, back to you.
Anita, many thanks. Anita McVeigh there at Balmoral. And let's discuss the many events today, but particularly that accession ceremony that we've been looking at St James's Palace. Let's discuss all of that with the constitutional expert Alan Trench, a fellow of the School of Social and Political Science at the University of Edinburgh. Good afternoon. It looks a very formal event with lots of pageantry. There's elements of that, of course, but it was televised for the first time. Explain the history of this, why we have to have such an event as this.
Good afternoon, Jane. Well, the Accession Council is the formal part by which the new sovereign is acclaimed as
God save
such.
the king.
And watching it today, I was struck by the extent to which essentially what part of what was going on was to ensure that no challenge could be brought to the title or the powers of the king from now on. Anyone who tries to do that effectively will have been guilty of treason by virtue of the events today.
And am I right in saying that there is still more to be done in other nations of the UK? Because this goes back to the time when there wasn't television and social media, and there was no other way of informing people about the change in monarch.
Indeed. I mean, there are going to be proclamations in Edinburgh, if it's not already happened, in Belfast, in Cardiff, and in many other towns and cities up and down the country. I mean, I noticed on Twitter just now that one is scheduled for tomorrow for Kensington and Chelsea, for example. So there's going to be local proclamations and national proclamations. And one of the things that's been going on very clearly, part of which reflects the history and the formalities that are established, and part of which is to do with the ambitions of King Charles to secure his throne, is to emphasise that he is the king for the whole of the United Kingdom, that he represents all the parts of the United Kingdom, not just England, indeed not just Scotland, though Scotland was very prominently part of today's proceedings. We saw that particularly with the business of taking the oath for the security of the Church of Scotland, which is a key part of the terms of the union with Scotland dating back to 1707. So all this is knitting together the kingdom for that Charles will now be monarch of.
And this is history and this is tradition, but of course, in terms of what the public might take from this particular ceremony, again, as with yesterday, listening to the King's message, what people are listening out for, what they want to hear is what he's promising to the nation, what sort of monarch he will be, what is the tone he is setting. And we are starting to get a sense of that, aren't we?
We're getting a sense of a monarch who wants to be more openly emotional than his mother was, of a monarch who wants to maintain continuity in all sorts of ways, who is very keen to involve his family, and particularly Prince William, who's of course had a significant upgrade in his titles in the course of the last 48 hours. Perhaps a more environmental monarchy than we've seen in the last few years, though the Queen has herself been very keen to promote environmental causes.
Well, and that, as we've been reminded many times in the last 24, 48 hours, is something that the King now, formerly Prince Charles, was passionate about a very long time ago, long before it was so routinely talked about as it is now.
Indeed. I mean, he has a long-standing form as a committed protector of the environment and someone who's been very concerned about the damage that humanity's been doing to it. And we may see much more of that in the course of the coming years.
And what of his role in relation to the Commonwealth as well? Because this is not, of course, just about the UK. The Queen was so passionate about her role within the Commonwealth. Do we expect to see similarly? Do you expect to see similarly?
Very much so. I mean, indeed, one of the things that was noticeable, particularly in yesterday's speech, and perhaps slightly less explicitly in today's accession proceedings, was the attempt to engage very directly with the Commonwealth realms and with the Commonwealth more generally, the republics that are part of the Commonwealth, and the various British possessions and territories around the world, to bring those into the same story as the one that is being told about the United Kingdom directly in these islands. So we saw, for example, the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Baroness Scotland, very prominently at the Accession Council. We had direct mention of the Commonwealth realms in King Charles's address yesterday. That's clearly a major element of this. And I think that's going to be a major project. And the Commonwealth has been a key element of what the Queen sought to achieve during her time on the throne. It was essentially an invention of her father's as countries started to cease to be part of the former empire. And a way of maintaining British influence around the world, even though, of course, it's very emphatically no longer the British Commonwealth.
Alan Trench, thank you so much. Constitutional expert and fellow at the University of Edinburgh. And let's stay with some of that, in fact, because when the Queen came to the throne in 1952, Britain's role in the world was changing rapidly. Former colonies were gaining independence as the British Empire evolved into the Commonwealth. And the 7 decades of the Queen's reign saw even greater change. In a moment, we'll hear from Yogita Lamai in Delhi and Neda Tawfiq in Jamaica. First, our correspondent Anne Soy reports from Kenya. The country Princess Elizabeth was visiting when she received news of her father's death and her accession at the age of just 25.
the royal visitors stepped off into the hot sunshine of Nairobi.
February 1952. The then Princess Elizabeth came to Kenya to represent her ailing father. Unknown to her, it was here that she would become queen after his unexpected death.
And from her car, the princess took many feet of film with her cine camera.
It was a tour of duty, but she and her husband took time to also enjoy the colony's vast wildlife. They stayed at a secluded tree house that once stood here. One of the hunters who had accompanied her said that for the first time in the history of the world, a young girl climbed into a tree one day a princess, and climbed down from the tree the next day a queen. She took the reins at a time of great change in Africa. Colonies gained independence and became republics. As head of the Commonwealth, the Queen reached out and helped bring them into the fold. She made bold moves. Here, seen dancing with a black man for the first time, Ghana's President Nkrumah. It stirred controversy in Britain, but she proved to be a leader ahead of her time. Now, King Charles will lead the Commonwealth. African nations with no historic links to the UK are choosing to join. But this is a continent that's changing fast, and preserving his mother's legacy will not be without its challenges.
A royal welcome on the first of 3 visits to India. In 1961, the Queen was in the early years of her reign.
I am indeed grateful to the citizens of Delhi.
And India was a young republic still enamored by the empire. Crowds gathered everywhere she went. As India turned 50, Queen Elizabeth sought to address some of the dark chapters of colonial history. At this public park, unarmed Indians were shot dead by British soldiers a century ago. The royal couple paid tributes, but stopped short of an apology.
75 years since independence, India is trying to move away from its past, and its links with the British royal family have become less significant. It's a complicated relationship because of the nature of colonial rule. But what we've seen here today is most people looking beyond the institution that the Queen represented to the person she was. And a deep sense of respect has been reflected in the tributes.
Nice to see you again. Great to see you again.
Indian Prime Minister Modi recalled his meetings with her. She personified dignity and decency in public life, he wrote. A day of mourning will be held on Sunday.
A warm welcome to Her Majesty the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh.
A young Queen Elizabeth in Jamaica on her first royal visit. Back in 1953, crowds were eager to catch a glimpse of the new monarch. The Queen, it said, had a deep affection for the island and would go on to visit a further 5 times. Reflecting on her life and service, officials here called her a portrait of dignity.
Jamaica is observing a period of mourning and flags are flying at half-mast. But there is a generational divide. While some older Jamaicans have shed a tear and expressed sadness, others, especially the youth, don't feel that same close connection. To them, the royal family hasn't properly atoned for Britain's historic role in slavery and colonization by way of a formal apology or reparations.
Nostalgia for the past is not a road many are interested in traveling. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge tried to emulate the Queen's 1953 visit, riding the very same Land Rover in March. It drew attention only to how much Jamaica had changed. The Prime Minister bluntly told the couple his country would move to become a republic, something 4 other islands in the Caribbean have already done. For now, though, the focus here is on paying respect to the Queen and the new monarch. On Saturday, the Jamaican Defence Forces will deliver a 21-gun salute to celebrate King Charles III.
Well, the Queen was part of the wartime generation that personified the values of duty and sacrifice. When she was 18, Princess Elizabeth joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, the women's branch of the army, and trained as a mechanic. Our special correspondent Fergal Keane has been to meet 3 members of that wartime generation to ask what Her Majesty the Queen meant to them.
She grew to adulthood as her country fought for its life. A fight Princess Elizabeth inspired in uniform and on the airwaves.
We children at home
are full of cheerfulness and courage. We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers and airmen.
In the broad expanse of mid-Atlantic, units of the British Navy guard the ocean that is the most vital battle zone of the war.
As Allied convoys braved German U-boats, Princess Elizabeth joined hundreds of thousands of young women in uniform, like Patricia Outram, a naval codebreaker.
She did exactly what I would have expected her to do, and did volunteer, and was active and in some ways equal to the other young women in the services. So I think we grew up very much with the idea that you participate. You don't sort of watch from the sidelines. You have a responsibility to defend your country.
But this is also the story of a vision, of a country that represented a civilized sanctuary for survivors of the Nazi genocide.
I thought it was the best choice of my life. I literally thought I arrived in heaven when I first came to England.
For Auschwitz survivor Ivor Pearl, 13 when he came, the princess symbolized hope.
Am I right in saying that she represented safety to you?
Very much so. Safety, security, and love, and especially I was as I 13 years old, lost everything. So I just thought that it was like a substitute parent.
The struggle for the survival of a free, united kingdom saw young men risk their lives day after day in bombing raids over Germany. Flight Lieutenant Colin Bell knew what it was to lose his friends to the war. Now 101, he mourns the loss of a queen and that sense of united wartime purpose she embodied.
The Queen was a perfect example of duty. She said right at the onset that she was going to devote her life to the service of the nation. That she saw as duty. She has gone after setting a matchless example, and sadly we shall never see the like of her again.
Second Subaltern Elizabeth Windsor, whose life and that of the generation she came from was shaped by war and its fearsome burdens. Fergal Keane, BBC News.
And we are going now to Balmoral. We know that the members of the royal family who are still there are now, we think, going to a church service. A convoy of cars suggesting that they are going directly there, not pausing there at the flowers. Still a huge number of members of the public there paying their respects at Balmoral.